Hello and welcome again. This is Misty, and right now we're working on setting up and how to light an oxy-fuel torch. So the first thing is we want to unscrew the cylinder valve cap. We want to crack the oxygen, blow out any dirt or debris in the valve, and we want to do the same thing for the acetylene. We want to open and close the cylinder slightly just to let a little gas out. We don't need to open it all the way. All right, so some fuel gas cylinders, they don't have a hand wheel that's permanently attached. So you need to use one of these style wrenches to open, okay? One of these, okay, a little thing on there, okay? So sometimes we need to make sure that we have one of those, but for the majority, most of the time, in these days and times, they have fuel gas cylinders with a hand wheel for emergencies. Okay, so we want to attach the oxygen regulator to the oxygen cylinder. We want to use a wrench to tighten the nut, and we're going to tighten this nut right here, okay? But we want to make sure that the wrench is fully on it so you don't slip and round out the nut. So remember that the nut doesn't need to be extremely tight. It's just tight enough so that it'll hold the pressure, but not overly tight where we're going to damage the threads, okay? Then attach the regulator to the acetylene in the same way, but we have to remember it is reverse threaded. Okay, so once we have both of those on there, all right, so once we have everything on there, if there's not a reverse flow valve built in the torch body, we want to attach the reverse flow valves to the regulator before the hose. So we want to put it right here, okay? So oxygen is green and acetylene is red. So we want to make sure that we connect the hoses to the appropriate regulators, and then we want to attach them to the torch body. Now, the torch body can have an O on it for oxygen and an F for fuel. More likely F, it won't say acetylene or anything like that. So we want to make sure that we're attaching them properly. All right, so we want to select the appropriate nozzle or tip to the torch body. So we want to only use a wrench on the nut to ensure that it's snug. We don't want to use pliers as it can deform the tip or the nozzle right here. So we want to be very, very careful not to deform the tip, and we want to make sure that we're not going to cross thread. All right, so we want to test the system. All the hoses, the regulators, the tips, the nozzle, and torch bodies, everything has to be attached. So once they've been attached, we want to make sure we back out the regulator screws on the regulators before opening the cylinders, which means take this out as much as we can, okay? So we want to make sure that we do that before we turn it on. Okay, so we want to make sure that we stand to one side of the cylinder valve when we open it. And we want to open this slowly. Once you've heard that the gas go into the regulator and see the needle on the gauge move just a little bit, then you can continue to open the valve where it should be. The acetylene cylinder. The cylinder valve itself should be only open enough to make the needle on the gauge move from probably about half to 3/4 of a turn. Because in an emergency, we want to be able to turn off that gas quickly. And if it's open all the way, what's going to happen? You're going to be, burning your hands or something's happening. So we want to make sure that it's only open just a little bit. So here we can see this is a oxygen cylinder valve. And what it has is called a dual seating valve. This means that the valve must be completely open to prevent leaks around the valve stem. And this goes for oxygen, argon, and CO2. So we can see here and here. So when it opens up and pushes these down so that when it comes out, it doesn't leak. So we want to make sure that they are always open all the way for oxygen, argon, and CO2. Okay, so we want to adjust the acetylene regulator to 5 psi. That's our working pressure. And adjust the oxygen regulator to about 25 psi. Okay, so after both regulators have been adjusted, we want to spray all the fittings with leak detection solution. If the fittings bubble, there's a leak. So then we want to turn off the system, So that means turning the cylinder valves off. We want to back off the pressure from the adjusting screws if there's a leak. So once the system has completely turned off and all the pressures released, we're going to take that fitting that's leaking, and we want to make sure that it's not damaged, and we want to refit it and reseat it, possibly making it just a little bit tighter. And make sure that there's no missing O-rings or valves that are needed. So what happens if you get a bad cylinder? So every once in a while you get a bad one, especially if you get rental cylinders. And if you can't get it to stop leaking, put it away in an area from others. You know, they say put it in a field, but I see that's kind of weird. And we want to mark the cylinder that it's bad, and we just want to not use that cylinder. And also you want to make sure that the company comes and picks it up so that nobody gets hurt. All right, here we go. We want to light the torch. Finally, we have everything going. There's no leaks. We're ready. We want to make a flame. Okay, here's the thing. Use only a spark lighter, aka I like to call it a sparkler. And we don't want to use a match or other devices like a lighter. That's just suicide. Do not hold the spark lighter over the tip, as we can see like this. We don't want to do that because it'll come back at you. Okay, we want to make sure that we do it on the side, and that way the flame goes away from us. And we want to make sure that you're aware of your surroundings. You don't want to light anything on fire or others, because this flame ignites really, really quickly. Okay, so a spark lighter is the only safe device to use when lighting a torch. Using a match can severely burn your fingers, and using a lighter is like holding a bomb. The flame can go into the lighter and ignite the fuel in the lighter, which ultimately will explode in your hand. So best practices, use a spark lighter, or what I call a sparkler. Makes your day better. Okie dokie, so let's go to steps to lighting the torch. So we're talking specifically about how to light the torch. We want to open the acetylene gas valve, no more than a half turn, just a little teeny tiny crack. Okay? We want to ignite the flame with the striker and increase the acetylene gas flow until the smoke leaves the tip and there's no smoke there. I should say, until the flame leaves the tip and there's no smoke present. All right, we want to decrease the flame just until the flame touches the tip. We want to open the oxygen valve and adjust it to a neutral flame. We want to depress the oxygen lever like we were going to use a cutting torch and make the adjustments from there. So let me show you some pictures. Here it is. Okay, so a neutral flame is obtained by starting with an excess acetylene flame. And there's a feather or an extension. So we can see like this, okay? This is what it would start off like. Okay. When the flow of acetylene is decreased or the flow of oxygen is increased, what we'll have is this inner feather here will actually disappear. So we'll just have this really, really bright one here, and then this kind of bluish one with a little yellow lickety flame. So the neutral flame disappears when the feather let me slow down. The neutral flame begins when the feather disappears. So the neutral or balanced flame is obtained when the mixed torch gas consists of a 1-to-1 volume of oxygen and acetylene. Okay, to obtain it by gradually opening the oxygen valve to shorten the acetylene flame and until we actually see that inner cone. Okay, for a strictly neutral flame, no white streamer should be present at the end of the cone. So in some cases, it's desirable to leave a slight acetylene streamer, they call it a feather, and it'll be just a teeny tiny bit at the end of the cone to make sure that the flame's not oxidizing. Okay, we don't want an oxidizing flame. The oxidizing flame is going to kind of look like this. Okay, so the flame adjustment is used, this neutral flame is used for most welding operations, and we can use it for preheating during cutting. And when welding steel with this flame, the molten metal is puddle and is quiet, and the metal flows easily without boiling or foaming or sparking. So this is a very good all-around flame to use. We're not going to really use anything different. And please, if you're confused about this, please speak to your instructor and get specific instructions on how to do this. This is important. All right, so let's talk about shutting down the system. It's almost like turning it on, but it's going to kind of go backwards. So be sure to turn off the oxygen valve at the torch. Then turn off the acetylene valve at the torch. Then we want to turn off the oxygen cylinder and the acetylene cylinder. Then we want to go to the regulators and back out the pressure regulator screws. Okay, so once we've done that, we need to make sure that the regulators go to 0. So what we're going to do is then we're going to open the valve for the oxygen on the torch, and the regulator should go to 0. If you're using a cutting torch, you can also depress the oxygen lever and it will go to 0. And then once that's done, you want to close the valve. And then you want to go and open the acetylene valve on the torch. You do the same thing. So once the regulators have been empty, we want to make sure that the equipment and the hoses are checked. Okay, we want to make sure that there's any nicks or burns or tears. We want to make sure that we report them right away and we have them repaired right away. Okay, and we also want to put a tag on them if there's an issue so that others know that this equipment needs to be repaired before use. Remember, using faulty hoses really can result in serious injury or death. So this is really important to make sure. You also want to do this before you start working. All right, so overall, in summary, there are a wide variety of fuel gases for oxy-fuel welding, cutting, and brazing. Acetylene and oxygen are the most common, but acetylene for a fuel gas may not always be the most appropriate to get the job done. So while oxy-fuel welding is not done as commonly as it was in the past, it still has its place and it still helps in the critical success of your product. All right, guys, as always, take care.
Weld the world.